Another lazy day, spent telling stories and just relaxing. You all tell me I need to relax more, so here we are, sharing tales as I invite you to more cozy horror. So, let's get right into it, shall we? Me personally, I'm a big fan of computer games, video games, anything really to pass a little time. But today's story is about a game that is a little bit more than just pixels on a screen. It may be up to the player to see if they can scare you.
I'm a big fan of old browser games. I used to play a lot of them when I was a kid, and while most of them were buggy or repetitive, they were still a great way to kill some time while you were at school or stuck at home. I have many fond memories of sitting at the computer with my friends, laughing and showing each other games we found on random websites. So when I heard that Java was being phased out, I got to thinking about all the old games I used to enjoy, and decided to track some of them down. I went to Reddit to see if anyone knew of any of the sites that used to host these old games, since many of them were now defunct. And a few of them suggested Newgrounds, a place I was familiar with, but a few others suggested a dozen other sites. These were smaller places which made up for their lack of showmanship with a vast selection of retro games. I'd started clicking on them, basking in the nostalgia for a while and losing myself in the simple pleasures of these simple games. I mean, I was stuck at home due to quarantine, so what else did I have to do? That's how I found I Can Scare You. I read the description and really liked what I saw. It made me wonder how I'd never found this game before. I used to love the small selection of adventure games you'd sometimes find on Java websites, little maze runners or exploration adventure games, and this one had a creepy twist that I really liked. I had expected it to be a lot of poorly animated jump scares, probably some loud screams accompanied by a picture of the girl from Poltergeist, but I figured I'd try it out anyway. What did I have to lose, right? When I loaded it up, I was greeted by something very familiar. For those unaware of the concept, screensavers were used a lot back in the day to keep your monitor from freezing in place. Windows had many iconic screensavers, but one of the most recognizable was the maze you saw sprawling out before you took on the point of view of the runner, shifting around and following a set path as you tried to find the exit. This game had dropped me into a very familiar maze, with brick walls and a sand floor, and an 8-bit soundtrack trying for creepy, but was mostly just sounding spooky. It was a little different than I remembered, though. The walls were black brick, like a negative copy of the maze, and covered in a bright green moss bordering on neon. The sand was also dark, and as I moved, it made that classic game crunch that meant you were walking over dirt. I could hear something like the wind in the background, and as I moved, I could see that the normal pictures on the wall had been replaced with grainy photos of people. The images were pixelated, but clearly actual photos. The strange thing was, they weren't anything like corpses or monsters or anything. They were just ordinary people. Some of them smiling, some of them looking off blankly, but all of them looking like candid shots of people from websites or the DMV or something. As I moved through the maze, I became aware of a voice that seemed to be following me. It was just a whisper at first, but the deeper I went into the maze, the louder it became. I would turn around and find the pictures were still on the wall, but whatever was making that noise was nowhere in sight. The images seemed to repeat themselves. Same 10 or 12 photos again and again, and I figured they must be the staff that had worked on the game or something. It was a little creepy having them watch me as I went through the maze, but no creepier than anything else I'd seen in a game. The voice, however, was definitely getting a little nerve-wracking. I could hear it now, and it was saying the same thing over and over again in a vaguely feminine computer voice.
I can scare you. I can kind of scare you.
I turned to the game, but there was nothing behind me. The voice had sounded close, and I assumed it was the enemy of the game. It kept moving away and getting closer, always just out of sight. So I just kept moving, kept looking for an exit, kept making my way through the maze. There was always an exit in the screensaver that made the maze fall apart and made a new maze begin. When I found what I was looking for, though, it turned out to be the last thing I'd expected. I came around a corner and heard the voice getting louder again.
I can scare you. I can kind of scare you.
I turned left and found a dead end.
I can scare you. I can kind of scare you.
I dashed back and took a right instead. Then I found another dead end.
I can scare you. I can kind of scare you.
I sighed and turned around to face my fate. I guess the game was over. That's when I saw what sort of beast lurked in this maze.
I can scare you. I can kind of scare you.
It was a grainy picture, just like the others, but this one moved and was far from the bland recreations the others had been. The image's eyes appeared to be leaking blood, the mouth crunching as it blared its ceaseless words. It barreled toward me lamely, filling the whole hallway, its face twisted in pixelated agony as it crashed closer and closer.
I can scare you. I can kind of scare you.
Despite its alarming form, it was clearly a picture of my dad's face. I backpedaled in fear, running and taking turns at random until I finally came to the dead end that I'd been looking for. It contained a single floating picture, and if this was the exit grid, I didn't know if I wanted to see what sort of maze it would generate next. The image was a crumpled body, a car accident or a hit and run, lying in the street in a squishy mass of broken flesh. It was grainy and pixelated like the others, but this one made me stop and gasp a little as I tried to make sense of it. The body's face was pointed to the sky, its mouth open and its eyes staring. As I looked at it, the blood seemed to pool around it, glistening wetly despite having no origin.
I can scare you. I can kind of scare you.
I jumped as I heard the phrase uttered right behind me, loud enough to make my speakers crackle. Suddenly my character fell over and my screen was covered in red as the screaming monster with my father's face crunched its jaws over me. I turned the screen off and pushed away from my computer, suddenly not wanting to see anymore. The last image had been the most familiar of all. It wasn't every day you got to look at your own face as you lay dying. The other pictures had been strangers, weird stock images, but the image of my father and I had been unique, and they were very jarring. The face of my father had been twisted in agony, and the eyes had been turned up in anger as the neon red blood oozed from them. My own face and body had been confused, devoid of hope, as I lay bleeding to death in a pool of my own blood. Even if the game had somehow pulled pictures from my computer, they couldn't have gotten either of those from me. No picture of my father existed that looked like that, and certainly no picture of me that looked like that existed. I closed the game and realized that at some point it had gotten dark. Looking at my watch, I realized I'd been playing the game for 3 hours. It was pushing midnight, and I shut my computer down and climbed in bed. I tossed and turned as I tried to push the image of that final horror out of my mind. As grainy and unreal as it had been, it was still a picture of me, and I was clearly dying. How did they have it? Where had they come from? Those images followed me into sleep, and they haunted my dreams all night. I found that I was running from that hellish thing in my nightmares, and it stretched and chomped right behind me. It didn't beat around the bush this time, and it dogged my heels for hours as I ran through that 8-bit hell. Right at the end, I came to a dead end and saw my own body lying on the floor, surrounded by blood. I rolled my head lamely to look at myself, moaning at a mouthful of blood as the huge dad head fell on me and turned my world red. When my cell phone woke me up at 7:15, it was almost a blessing. I reached for it groggily, seeing my mom's number and answering it shakingly. Hello? Honey? Baby, I need you to listen to me for a minute. There's been an accident. Your dad's dead, sweetheart. She sobbed a little before continuing. I sat up quickly, still thinking I was dreaming. What? Turn on the news, honey. It's been all over the news since it happened. I need you to come home right away. I need someone here with me. I told her I would, and she hung up, and as I walked into the living room, switched on the TV, wondering what I would find on the screen. It had been a bus accident that had happened about an hour and a half ago. Dad, the other passengers, and the driver had been killed when another bus had T-boned them at an intersection. The bus Dad had been on had been crushed against a storefront, and the engine had ignited. The ensuing fire had made rescue very difficult. After extinguishing it, emergency services had really only been rescuing bodies. Then they started flashing the pictures of the deceased across the screen, and I felt the remote slip from my hands and clatter on the hardwood. I recognized all of them. They were the faces in the maze. I flopped bonelessly onto the couch, my legs refusing to hold me. I'm curled on the couch now, filled with a deep sense of dread over the knowledge I seemed to possess. Everyone I'd seen in that maze last night was dead now. Everyone except me. I had seen my own contorted face as I lay broken on the floor of that 8-bit maze. If everyone I had seen in there was supposed to die today, why had I seen my picture? I hadn't died. I was still clearly alive. For now. People keep calling me, but all I can do is hunker on the couch and wait. Waiting for my own fate to come and sweep me off the board as well. So if you stumble across this game in your internet travels, do yourself a favor and don't play it. I wish to God I never had.
Sounds like my tea is almost done. That should help me get through these next few stories without the usual amount of crackling my voice usually has this time of year. I can tell you from experience that a good chair is always important for any writer in the trade. But it looks like the subject of today's story has his eye on a very specific chair. So let's find out a little more about Grandpa's deal.
When my parents told me I was going to be sent to take care of my great-grandfather, I was very hesitant. My great-grandfather, Iman Franger, celebrated his 110th birthday in December. Not that anyone had been invited to his party. Actually, there had been no party, because my great-grandfather was a shut-in. He was a famous horror writer, writing and publishing stories since the turn of the century, and he was supposed to have a small fortune saved up. As such, he lived in a Mary Shelley-style house out in the middle of nowhere, toiling away at his latest work of terror. My mother had 5 sisters, and all of them had been trying to get the highly coveted spot in Great-Grandpa's will. But so far, none of my cousins had managed it. It wasn't like I wanted any of his money, but Mom was insistent. She had been after Great-Granddad's money, just like her sisters, since her early adulthood, and now it seemed that her time had finally come around. Since all my other cousins had struck out, this seemed to be her chance. She told me to go and spend the summer, and maybe some of the fall with him, and see how things worked out. Bring some of your writings with you. Maybe that'll get you in good with the old man. And that was how I came to be on my great-grandfather's porch in mid-May, preparing to stay until nearly Halloween. The house was an old 3-story that I knew was nearly a mansion from the few times I'd been there as a kid. There were 8 rooms, 5 bathrooms, a kitchen, a study, and of course my great-grandfather's office on the 3rd floor. Sometimes you could see him through the large bay window as he sat up there, hard at work at the old typewriter he favored. He had once sat close to the window so that he could look out and perhaps be inspired by the forests or the lawns that surrounded his property. Now, it appeared, he preferred a spot away from such distractions. I rang the doorbell and was unsurprised to hear the lock click open electronically. Great-Grandpa kept no staff. Before I'd been born, a few of his caretakers had turned up missing, and after several searches of the home and property, Great-Grandpa had finally just dismissed his staff and lived alone. He had mostly relied on the kindness of his relatives, or just done without for most of my life. He was very reclusive, and I wasn't really looking forward to spending the next 6 months in his company. I'd been preparing a manuscript to send off for publication, and I figured that I would have little time for revisions if I was too busy tending to my aging grandsire and his monstrous house. Looking back on it now, I see that I really had no idea what was in store for me. The house had a musty look to it, like some old Gothic construction from one of Great-Grandfather's novels. I don't know if this was intentional, but it gave the place a very uncared-for look. I had to wonder what my cousin Leslie had actually done here when he stayed for 8 months last year. The floors were dusty, the drapes in the kitchen were growing a fine crop of mold from a leaky window, and the whole place just had a very dank smell about it. Given the house's age, this was no surprise. The house was well over 100 years old, and had been both my great-grandfather and my grandfather's ancestral home. Now, it was little more than a hulking relic that sat waiting for my great-grandfather to die so some construction company could turn it into a strip mall. A speaker crackled in the foyer, and the buzzing sound made me jump a foot. "Don't just stand around counting the silver. Come up to my study. I have orders for you." Even at 110, it sounded as though he hadn't lost the steel in his voice. So I climbed up the 3 flights of stairs, wondering how my great-grandfather made it up and down these stairs every day. He must come down to eat, I reflected. He hadn't had anyone to help him since Leslie had left 6 months ago. As my young, sturdy legs made the climb up the creaky old boards, I reflected that I was nearly winded as I came to the 2nd floor landing. I would soon become quite intimate with those steps in the months to come, though. My grandfather sat in the topmost room, a room that had once been the attic. The second set of stairs had been built just for him, and they were steeper than the original set by far. As I came up the stairs, I could see my grandfather's desk and the battered old wing-back chair he had owned since I was a child. The desk and the chair sat in profile, and it was like a scene from a movie. The camera would start a slow pan in and mount the stairs, and the audience would see the back of the red upholstered chair and hear the clicking of the keys. He sat hunkered there like a gargoyle, arthritic fingers tapping away at the keys of his old battered typewriter. The sound was skeletal somehow, like bones against ivory. He kept right on clocking away as I stood a respectful distance behind his chair, not wanting to get off on the wrong foot with this ancient writer that I must share quarters with for the next few months. The attic room was the size of a normal studio apartment and appeared almost Spartan in its furnishings. There was a bed, small and neat, several sagging old bookcases that looked equally as infected with mold, a rug that stretched from the landing to his dark mahogany desk, which sat ever facing into the corner. He had once faced it towards the large picturesque window that looked over his property, but now it looked only into the corner, as though someone had put my ancient grandsire in time out. "I understand that you are to be my new caretaker." I jumped a little, the clicking leading me to believe that he would go right on ignoring me for a little while longer. His voice was creaky, raspy from lack of use. I expected to see dust puff out from behind the chair, and when he turned, I decided that my expectations hadn't been far off. To call my great-grandfather ancient would have missed the mark. The man was shrunken to the point of elvishness. He could not have been more than 4 feet tall, and his arms and legs looked shrunken and childlike. His arms were held out in front of him, hands held down at the wrists in a way that made me wonder how much it must hurt him to ride on. His legs hung an inch above the floor as he sat in that monstrous chair, and I remember thinking that he looked like a child sitting in his father's seat. The image was more grotesque than humorous, however. "You should know that I have high expectations for my helpers. I give no special treatment for family members. Your life here will be hard, but focus on the silver lining. You might just manage to acquire that oh-so-coveted spot in my will that my children and my children's children and now my children's children's children seem so incapable of garnering. Anything is possible, I suppose." And when he shrugged his shoulders, I imagined that I could hear them grind together. Listening to him talk was like watching a particularly talented bit of ventriloquism. His accent was plummy, cultured, and far too deep for the child-sized creature residing in that throne. I expected someone to poke their head out from the back of the chair any minute now, and laugh, saying how they had gotten me. When we both ended up staring at each other for the next few seconds, and no grand revelation was revealed, he went on. He told me about his meal schedule first. He ate breakfast at 5, lunch at 11, and dinner at 6. He subsided almost entirely on Campbell's soup, of which he had a large supply in the pantry. There were 7 different flavors of soup, one for each day of the week, and every month there was a number I would call to have more delivered. He told me that I could make a list of food I wanted as well, and that they would be delivering it to the house with the order. "Just keep the bill under $500 a month," he droned. "I would like to remain in funds until I die." He bathed every night at 7. While he assured me that he didn't need help bathing, he would need help getting to the bathroom, into the tub, out of the tub, and back to his room. I was to put him in the tub and then leave until summoned again. He would be fully dressed again, and when I arrived I would help him back to his room. His schedule, other than that, seemed to be writing. He wrote sometimes for 18 or 19 hours a day, and would often write well into the night if the mood took him. He rarely slept, he told me, and I would likely find him napping in his chair if I needed something early in the morning. He slept most often between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. I was not to disturb him or make any noise between those hours whatsoever. "When you're my age, you find you just don't need to sleep as much as normal people. But I won't have the little that I do get disturbed by your needless clatter." My duties, other than feeding and bath time, were my own. I would like the house swept once a week, the windows opened once a week to air out the dust, the drapes taken down and washed once a month.
I have a sneaking suspicion that feckless cousin of yours didn't accomplish any of these things, so it's likely a mess down there. I do not own a TV, nor do I have internet. There is a phone in the kitchen that you may use if you should need to, and while I do have electricity, I expect you to turn the lights off behind yourself. I seem to recall that your cousin Winifred racked up a $400 power bill while staying here, and I ejected her for it. So long as you follow my rules and keep the house, I suspect I will ignore you for your stay here, and you will have no hardships.
He dismissed me after that, and thus began my time in my great-grandfather's house, a time I would come, in later years, to regret undertaking. It first began with the typing. My grandsire hadn't lied. He wrote 18 or 19 hours a day, and the keys of his typewriter were loud. You could hear him typing away from anywhere in the house, and the noise became a constant background drone. Using my hotspot on my phone, I was able to get some writing done, and my proofreading was coming along very well. It was slow, and the signal out here was poor at best, but I plucked away at it as dutiful as I could, despite the distracting sound of all that clacking. The sound almost seemed to scuttle, worming its way into your ears like phantom fingers as you sat trying to concentrate. I tried playing music, I tried using earbuds, but no matter how high the volume, the sound seemed to clatter against my senses like a badly played piano. I began to become rather sympathetic for a certain Poe character, having my own telltale heart clattering at all hours of the night. On sunny days, I would even take my laptop out onto the lawn and get some work done. Though it defied all logic, I imagined that I could hear that typewriter, even on the porch, or on the way to the mailbox down the lane, easily a half-mile from the house. I know how it sounds, but I also know what I heard, and it invaded not just my waking hours, but my resting hours as well. That's also how the dreams started. Sometimes I would dream that it was me sitting in that big old chair, typing away for hours on end as the words just came sliding up the paper. In my dream, the paper was never ending. It simply rolled on and on as it came out of the typewriter. The words rose like a tree in the forest before my very eyes. My fingers would clack endlessly on the keyboard, my young, strong digits becoming withered like great-grandfathers as I typed my life away. I was always in front of that big bay window as I worked, watching the fireflies out in the woods as they frolicked. Sometimes, though, I would catch a glimpse of myself in the mirrored glass and jolt awake as my great-grandfather's face looked back at me. Then there was the whispering. The whispering had likely been there from the start, but I didn't pick up on it for several weeks. Great-grandpa didn't own a vacuum, so I was stuck sweeping the floors and taking the drapes outside to beat them with a broom. Fortunately for me, carpets were not all the rage at the turn of the century, and Great-grandpa had hardwood floors throughout. I was sweeping the second floor when I heard a spidery whisper coming from the stairs at the end of the hallway. It was nearly unintelligible, the voice the thinnest of whispers, but my great-grandfather was unable to match it in his response. "I won't. You can't make me. You don't even know if he could take my place. It doesn't matter. I won't curse him with the same life I've been cursed with. Stop whispering in my ear and let me finish." Then came the loud crash of keys resumed, and Grandpa ignored whoever had been whispering to him. I thought about it as I swept, unsure what to make of it. Who had he been talking to? More importantly, who had he been talking about? I knew that he had no phone up there. If he needed something, he always called down the stairs, and the whispering had sounded like it was coming from right inside the room as opposed to a phone. I shook it off as the senile ramblings of the old and troubled man and went about my chores, wanting to get them done so I could return to my own work. That was the first time, but it wouldn't be the last time I heard those whispers. I began to hear them in more than just Grandpa's study as well. They began as something like the scrabbling of mouse feet, a skittery noise that scrabbled across my senses sometimes. The longer I listened, the more I heard, and what I heard was frightening. They whispered about far-off places and foreign hellscapes. They whispered about terrible devils and ancient evils, all of which would win in the end, despite the hero's best efforts. I heard them sometimes in my sleep, a place I could not escape them, and they often filled my dreams with terrible prophecy. The work was literally the third indication that something was amiss.
While Grandpa's genre had always been horror, I was more interested in fantasy and YA. My current manuscript was a puff piece, something to get my name on the desk of an agent or a publisher so I could work on more groundbreaking fantasy. My story was good, warring vampire clans and a romance that was trying to blossom amidst the chaos, but it was nothing new. It was a safe bit of YA pseudo-fantasy, the kind that had a built-in audience and was fairly safe. The longer I worked on it inside Grandpa's house, though, the darker the story began to become. Characters began to die more often, backstories became less teen-friendly, and a shadow fell across what had been a fairly light little book up until that point. A lot of my time seemed to be spent fixing changes I had made the day before, and I was getting frustrated with the shifts in tone that seemed to be trying to take place in my story. It was as though someone was also whispering in my ear, telling me to spill blood or inject horror where none was needed. I found my mind wanting to write things that I'd never been interested in before, and the feeling made me uneasy. Then, one morning, I woke up to find my great-grandfather reading some of my editions from the other side of the table. I had fallen asleep at the keys, and when I woke up, I saw his spindly arms scrolling down as he read. It was clear he didn't like using the computer. He made a face every time he had to touch the keyboard, as if putting his fingers on it was something unpleasant. And when he saw me noticing him, he turned the computer back towards me. Then, he did something I'd never seen him do in all the years I'd known him. He smiled.
"You write well, boy. It's a little fluffy for my taste, but it appears that I'm not your target audience. How long have you been writing it?"
I told him I'd been writing my current work for about a year, but I'd been writing in general for most of my life. He nodded, seeming to like the taste of this new information.
"Thought I was the only one, at least since your Uncle Stephen passed."
Then he slid out of the chair, his feet barely making a sound as they touched the floor, and ambled back upstairs. After that, I seemed to notice him hovering around the dining room often as I made corrections and changes to my manuscript. At first I tried to ignore him, not wanting to make it awkward, but as the weeks tripped by, I asked if he'd like to come help me with my revisions. He declined at first, saying he needed to get back to work. But over time, he actually came to sit with me and helped me labor through the 500 pages of tween trash, as he often called it. Every new revision, the darker ones at least, seemed to interest him, and I found myself taking his suggestions more than I rejected them. Then, one day around Halloween, he invited me to his study. He said there was something he needed to show me. He was standing by the gigantic wingback chair when I arrived. He looked even more like an underfed child as he slid a hand over the arm, his head only slightly taller than the arm of the chair itself.
"You've impressed me, son. Your writing is a little rough, but I suppose that all writing looks rough after a century of it. Many people have asked me how I've lived so long, and writing is the secret to my success. The writing, however, is only half of it. The other half is this." He stroked the chair again as he said it, a look between loathing and loving crossing his face. "Your chair?" I asked skeptically. "Not my chair. This chair was never mine. It was loaned to me on the grounds that I use it for its intended purpose."
"And what purpose is that?" I asked, feeling the hair on the back of my neck prickle.
"Terror,"
he answered. I almost expected to hear thunder rumble outside as he made this exclamation. "The chair is meant to spread terror?" I said, trying to keep the skepticism out of my voice. Great-grandpa didn't seem to notice. He just kept looking at the chair in that loathsomely fascinating way he had. The chair seemed to have him under its sway, and he was powerless to cleave from it.
"The chair is a conduit. Its purpose is simple, to spread fear and to propagate terror. You've heard the whispers by now, I'm sure."
I nodded, hearing them scurry across me even now, as I watched my grandfather stroke the old chair that suddenly seemed to be shallowly respirating before my eyes.
"From the second I read the changes to your manuscript, I knew it had gotten in your head. It calls to you, just as it called to me, and now it wants to make a deal."
I took a step back from the chair. "What are you talking about? A deal? What sort of deal?"
"You can write forever. Write as much as you want. and your work will make you the kind of money that puts normal men to shame. All you must do is sit in this chair and let it work through you. You can do that, can't you?"
I wanted to refuse him, this grinning skeleton in his slowly, but now visibly respirating chair. The longer I looked at it, the more I could see the baleful eyes, the fanning nostrils that were almost snake-like, the grinning mouth that sat in the seat. It looked at me, and as much as I wanted to deny what he was saying as the ramblings of a crazy old man, I couldn't. The chair's glamour had slipped away, and now I could see the monster that lay beneath.
"Come sit," he beckoned. "Come sit and let it show you its power."
I didn't want to. Sitting on that thing was the last thing I wanted to do, but I found my legs had other ideas. I had moved as if by magic, my legs that of a puppet's on strings. I expressed all my will, but I was a child resisting a hurricane. Great-grandfather moved aside as I came before his throne, and when my bottom slid into that hoary old thing, I expected the teeth to gobble me up. Instead, I was filled with something unexpected. I was filled with completion, a sense of homecoming. I was complete. I saw myself reach for the typewriter, as I had done in my dreams. The whispering beckoned me to write, compelling me to spill my talent for it, and I obliged. The words rolled from me. They weren't mine, not mine at all, but they oozed from my fingers like blood. My words became the click-clacking of the keys. My mind was a chalkboard fit only to be wiped and filled again and again. I was taken over, possessed, and the demon of inspiration capered through me. There was no endless paper now, but I saw the sheets filled and refilled again and again, made full only to be exchanged by another, and as I looked down at the ivory keys, I felt my sanity reassert itself as I saw the stains on that virgin ivory. They were dark, old blood, but they would surely be wetted again. I don't remember passing out, but I remember waking up. I was lying on the bed in my great-grandfather's study. He was sitting on the edge of it, looking even more childlike as his legs dangled. It occurred to me how infrequently I saw him away from his keyboard in all the months I'd been here, and he looked both forlorn and greatly relieved as he watched his withered feet swing.
"You did quite well. The first 300 pages of a manuscript that will soon grace the New York Times bestseller list, I am certain. At least, my agent seems to think so. I never have much of a head for popular fiction."
"What?" But I realized I didn't know what to ask.
"It kicks like a mule, don't it, son? I remember the first time I experienced it, back in 36, or was it 26? Who can remember? I was edging towards middle age then, kids out of the house and off on their own, and your great-grandmother had just died of a sudden pneumonia. I was alone in this mausoleum, sure that I had maybe one book in me, but unsure of how to coax it out. The man I bought the chair from showed up out of nowhere, showed up as if I had summoned him, and said he had just what I was looking for. Then he showed me this ghastly hulk you see crouching over there, and I was highly skeptical. My eyebrows slid up even more when he said that it had already been paid for."
He got a dreamy look on his face, as though his mind was casting back through time.
"He told me that all I had to do was write, just write, and the chair would do the rest. He told me that the chair would take my writing into heights that no one had ever dared hope, and all I had to do was shake his hand. When I sat down to begin, the man tipped his hat and grinned like an imp. I never looked back. At first, it was thrilling, churning out stories, books, whole series over the course of years. I was detailing my legacy at a breakneck speed. I was like a dragon, looking up to see decades pass by as I sat before my window.
His dreamy look became melancholy then, his toes flapping bonelessly as his legs rose and fell like lunatic jackstraws.
"This is my legacy, boy. This is the inheritance that all my children and all my grandchildren and all my great-grandchildren have struggled for. The money, the house, the land, none of it matters. My inheritance is that chair and that typewriter and a legacy of stunning horror. It is a mantle, and if you chose not to take it up, I would understand. But, and I know from experience, if you don't take it up, you'll drive yourself crazy thinking about what could have been. You'll wonder if the success you have couldn't have been greater, if the joy you felt could not have been more, and if your years upon the earth could not have been better spent.
He looked at me then with such naked hope that I realized what it would mean if I took this burden from him. He would die, but it seemed he was ready to die. His legacy would be mine. The paper would say that the talent ran in the family, and it would continue to run until I passed it on or fell to dust. In the end, I can't even say that I did what I did to save my great-grandfather from his continued suffering. In the end, I did it because he was right. If I didn't do it, I would always wonder what if. He extended his hand to me. The papers are signed and sitting on my desk. The house, the land, it's all yours. Everything. And everything that comes with it, he emphasized. I'm proud to say that my hand didn't shake as I took his. On the third pump of his arm, my great-grandfather turned to dust, and I was left to sit and watch him scatter across the place he loved so much. Then I took my place in the mouth of that great beast and began to write. I would continue to do so for a very long time. It's been so long since I watched my grandsire dissolve before my eyes. In that time, I've been the most prolific horror writer of my age. I've built up money like some old dragon, sitting on my wealth as I hunker on my hill. Sometimes my relatives come to see me, but most times they don't. My own mother refused to talk to me after great-grandfather left everything to me in his will, but I hardly noticed. She died a few years ago, or was it a few decades? I didn't attend the funeral. Being away from my work for too long makes the whispers less quiet. I travel some, as my grandfather must have done in the beginning, but I never stay away for long. The stories must be told, the conduit must be maintained, and I must remain the keeper of this black lighthouse. It takes a toll, though, to be certain. I understand why my great-grandfather slept so little. If I cannot continue to expel this darkness, it pools inside me, and the vivid nightmares often bring me screaming back to reality. The bags under my eyes have become luggage, and yesterday I glanced up into the window and thought I'd seen a ghost. The old man that looked out from it was withered and sunken, and I thought that great-grandpa's ghost had returned to torment me. I see now why great-grandfather moved into the corner after a time. I'm not entirely alone, though. My cousins have gone on to have children of their own, and sometimes they send them to me, as I was once sent. One of them, a girl named Katie, is on her way now. I've heard that Katie is a rather prolific poet, and said to be quite talented. We shall see what the chair makes of her. Who knows? Perhaps I might be allowed to stop too before long, and bask in the comfortable blackness that awaits me as well. I have discovered the coziest blanket imaginable, and it didn't even cost me all that much. Really makes sitting here with a cup of tea and listening to the rain such a joy, especially when it's with you. Construction is never an easy gig. Long hours, the weather is always less than inclement, and there are, of course, other elements that make it unadvisable. But when the subject of our story discovers a black spot, it's certainly something he comes to be wary of. I won't go back to work tomorrow. I don't care what Jack says and how much he threatens to tell my probation officer. I will not hear the way my coworkers laugh at me. They tell me it's nothing, but they didn't see what I saw. They haven't seen the spot like I did today. Yeah, I did a little time. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not going to bullshit anybody and tell them a lie. I got a little too drunk one night and assaulted someone in a bar. It was my first offense, and I did my 2 years without much hassle. Hell, they even let me do the last year at work release so I could keep paying my parents' mortgage for them. I have experience in construction, so it was a good fit. They set me up with a crew, doing drywall and laying flooring, and I worked for a good bunch of guys. It was a sweet gig, and it was a gig I was told I could keep after I got released. On the day I was released, I told them I'd see them in a few days and rejoin the real world. That, however, was the night my dad suffered a stroke. It was a bad one. Mom woke me up screaming, and we took him to the hospital in the back of an ambulance. Suddenly there were doctors to talk to, changes to make to the house I'd grown up in, and a man who'd once taken care of me to take care of. He'd lost function in nearly half his body, and with Mom feeling very overwhelmed, it became my job to take care of Dad. It wasn't until my probation officer informed me that I was in danger of violating my probation that I realized it had been almost a month since I'd been released. I understand that you've got some things going on, but you have to maintain employment as part of your probation. Your job with a construction firm says that they'll let you come back if you're still interested, but you have to have some income coming in by next week or risk violating your probation and going back to prison. I went to the foreman the next day to see if I could get my old job back, but it appeared I was in for a surprise. Yeah, sorry, we filled your spot on that crew. We didn't know if you were coming back, and we needed a full crew for the job. I gritted my teeth and resist the urge to rage at him. Then why did you tell the probation officer I could come back? 'Cause I have a new crew for you, if you're still interested in it. I told him I was, and he gave me a number to call. That's Jack. He's been begging for another able body. Give him a call and see if you guys can meet up today. I thanked him, inwardly fuming that he'd already filled my position, and called the number. Jack answered on the third ring and told me that his crew left at 5 a.m. If I wanted a spot on it, I'd better be on the yard at 5 a.m., ready to work. I told him I would, and he hung up on me mid-sentence. I already didn't have a good feeling about this guy. He was terse, and didn't sound like the kind of guy you wanted to have a beer with after work. Regardless, I needed the work, so I set my alarm the night before and dragged up before dawn to meet this asshole at the yard at 5 a.m. And oh boy, had I been right in my hunch about this guy. Jack was one of those average-sized dudes who thinks he's a giant. The kind of guy who gets his ass beat in prison. He wore jeans and a sleeveless t-shirt, with a gold chain that hung down into his thick chest hair. His hair was held in place with enough grease to change the oil in my car, and I saw him single me out the second I showed up. He had a small crew, maybe 10 guys, but the way he zoned in on me let me know that he'd been looking for me. Well, you actually showed up. Rick may speak highly of you, but I'm not just going to drop somebody down so some ex-con can have a job. You'll be cleaning the job site until I'm convinced that you're not going to show up high or just dip out in the middle of the day. If that's not okay with you, then you're going to go tell your probation officer to send you back where you came from. He turned and walked away, the crew piling into his truck as I stood there in stunned silence. I had to remind myself that I needed this job as I piled into the back of the truck with them. I had to remind myself a lot over the next few hours that Mom and Dad needed me home and not back in prison. We pulled up outside this dumpy-looking house in the suburbs just as the sun started to come up over the horizon. It was an old 2-story with a peeling exterior and a yard that looked like it had last been mowed during the Bush administration. They had made a pathway up to the walk so that they could bring in their tools, and the grass looked stomped flat by the constant traffic. They had set up a generator near the porch, and a big metal dumpster created an island in the grass where they had just rolled it off and dropped it. All in all, it was a sloppy-looking sight, but I was in no position to throw stones. Jack collected us up on the porch so he could give out assignments. The old house was being renovated so the company could flip it, and he set several of us to ripping up carpet. After assignments were given, Jack and 3 others went upstairs to assess the damage, and I didn't see them come back until after lunch. I was set to pulling carpet in the downstairs living room. It was a dingy little room with a pair of small windows that reminded me of eyes. The carpet was disgusting, covered in hair and crumbs, and it was tacky like old soda had been spilled on it. I was sliding on my gloves when someone threw a crowbar on the floor and walked off. "Hey, aren't you going to help me?" I asked, but the guy who tossed the crowbar just shook his head. "We each get a room. This one's yours, so get to it." Then they left me to pull carpet in this big dirty room by myself. The living room wasn't huge, but it was still a lot to ask of one person. I pressed the crowbar in and pulled the carpet away from the wall, not bothering to be gentle. The drywall was going to be pulled out next, and I suddenly wondered why they were pulling the carpet out first.
I shrugged. I wasn't the boss here, so I guess I just have to do as I was told. That was the first time I noticed the spot. It was in the corner of the living room, a big water stain that seemed to take up 2 walls. It was about the size of a basketball, and the water spot looked like it would be wet if you touched it. It kind of freaked me out, for some reason, though I couldn't tell you why at the time. As I worked, I could almost swear it was moving, just a little, and I got that feeling like eyes on the back of my neck. You know the feeling, the one that makes your hair prickle up, the one that makes you think you might be being watched. I tried not to let it bug me, but it was like I could feel that spot as I worked. The carpet didn't take too long. An hour later, I had rolled it up and was ready to haul it out. I looked around for help, but the others were still hard at it, or at least pretending to be. I could see 3 of them sitting around smoking or chatting for every one guy working. When I asked them to help me get the carpet out to the dumpster, they just scoffed and waved me off. I couldn't move it by myself, so I just left it in the living room and went to look for more carpet to pull. It seemed that my fellow workers weren't as diligent as I was, because there was still carpet in 3 rooms that seemed to need removing. I sighed. This was clearly going to be my life for a while, and I set to work pulling the carpet to get ready to haul it all out. As I worked in a bedroom, the wall painted off blue with stormy-looking clouds on it, I got the feeling that someone was watching me. I turned to the door, thinking maybe one of my coworkers had come to see who was making so much noise back here, but there was no one. I looked to the window, but it was so caked with dust that no one could have seen anything through it. I glanced over to the closet, thinking maybe someone was lurking in there, and that was when I saw the source of my discomfort. A basketball-shaped spot on the wall over the closet door. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. It was just a water spot. The house was probably full of them, and I just happened to have found one that looked exactly like the other one I had seen. I kept working, pulling up tack strips in places, but it still felt funny, like something was watching me. As the carpet rolled up, I began to push it towards the door, sending up puffs of smoke as it thumped over. As I pushed, I couldn't help but glance at that spot. It was still there, hanging over the closet door, seeming to watch me as I worked. I turned to look at it squarely and gasped as I noticed a large white hole in the middle of the spot, like an eye floating in a puddle. I ran out of the room then, bumping into another worker as I beat a hasty retreat. "There you are," he said tersely. "We've been looking for you. Come help us move this carpet." I was more than happy to oblige, anything to get out of that room, and we spent the rest of the morning hefting carpet. We pulled it to the dumpster, tossing it in haphazardly, and then assessed the work for tomorrow. As we broke for lunch, I had almost forgotten about the spot. People being around me made me feel a little crazy about being afraid of it, but as we worked, I could swear I saw it again and again. The walls were covered in stains. The pipes were likely bad, but this one was definitely the same spot. It had the same wobbly edges and deep black center as the one I'd seen the first time. The white circle was gone, though, but I still found myself looking for it when I was in a room. The guys on the crew must have noticed because they started making jokes about how prison had made me jumpy. "He's got to check all the corners when he comes in to make sure no booty bandits are lurking," a big, slovenly one in overalls would say, and they'd all laugh like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. If I didn't need this job so bad, I'd have made something of it. We moved upstairs eventually, finding 2 bedrooms and a bathroom that needed carpet or flooring removed. By 5 o'clock, we had all the carpet out of the house and in the dumpster out front. Jack came back in a truck, handing out paychecks and thanking the guys for their hard work. When he came to me, he handed me the check grudgingly, scowling the whole time and holding it when I tried to take it from him. "Tomorrow I expect some real work out of you, not just half-assing it like you did today." I took the check and walked off. I'd find my own way back. The next day was a little better. Drac said that the drywall would come next, and then he and his cronies disappeared out to the truck while the rest of us worked. We all started tearing out drywall, dust and nails flying, and I meant to swing my hammer into that spot extra hard when I saw it. To my disappointment, though, the spot never showed up. I'd seen it everywhere yesterday, seen it in every room at least once, but today it was absent. We spent the day tearing out drywall and cleaning up after ourselves. When 5 o'clock came, we packed up and went out to get paid. Today had been better. Nothing builds camaraderie like a little hard work, and I found myself joining in on the jokes and conversation that happened in the group. We were covered in drywall dust as we walked out that afternoon, laughing about how Tony had been scared by a rat when it burst out of the drywall in the laundry room. Jack looked at them coldly, affronted that they had accepted me so easily. He handed me my check in silence, and I piled into the back of the truck with the others this time. The next day was the last day I'd get to work with them. We spent that day hanging drywall downstairs. Between the 10 of us, we worked diligently and quickly. The drywall went up a sheet at a time, something I was pretty good at, and I was glad to see it covered the hollow studs and the newly blown-out insulation. We marked a few spots where the beams were rotten, but the pipes actually looked pretty good, as did the electrical. I began to wonder what had made the spots I kept seeing. They looked so wet, but I pushed it out of my mind as I worked beside my newfound companions. By 5 o'clock, we'd done most of the downstairs, and we'd have the rest finished by tomorrow so we could move upstairs. When I walked out onto the porch, though, I realized I'd forgotten something. I had rubbed at my wrist, looking for the reassuring feel of metal that had gotten me through 2 years in the can, but I found only bare skin. My heart skipped a beat. My dad's watch was gone. When I remembered that I had laid it on the counter, not wanting it damaged while I was working, I must have forgotten all about it in the bustle. I grabbed my check and turned to go back in the house, Jack scowling at me as I walked off. "We're leaving," he called to my back, but I waved him off. "If you're gone when I get back, I'll just find my own way." I wasn't about to leave my watch here overnight. I went to the kitchen and checked the counter, but there was nothing there. It was powdery with dust from today's work, and I thought I could see an indent where the watch had been. I checked underneath the counters and around the floor, but I couldn't find my watch. I began to look around, hoping it hadn't found its way into someone else's pocket. I walked through the rooms, looking into each of them, to see if I'd maybe left it there, and when I looked into the living room, I was rewarded for my effort. Sitting in the dead center of the debris-riddled floor was my missing watch. I took a step, but something brought me up short. A little tickle on the back of my head told me that it was a little too convenient. It was like a trap baited with something for an unlucky animal to blunder into. I shook it off. I wanted my watch, damn it, and I wasn't going to just abandon it because I had a hinky feeling. I bent down to get it, wrapping my fingers around the cold metal, when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. It was pulsating, sludgy, something that I had seen soaking into the new drywall. I looked up exasperated, figuring that someone had put a nail through a pipe at some point today. But what I saw drew me up short. I was left half bent, filled with fear, as I saw the oozy black spot seething on the drywall. It was bigger than a basketball now, its inky depth seeming to beat like a heart. As I watched, I could see 2 white circles materializing out of the soup. They rolled around like lost eggs, and finally came to rest in the middle of the sludge. I wanted to run. I didn't want to see whatever was in that thing, but I was trapped like a deer in headlights. I felt my breath hitching in my chest, and could only wait for my legs to regain their strength. The white orbs rolled around in the soup and became eyes. They blinked at me, their centers trained on me as I bent there. All at once, a Cheshire cat smile floated under them as it beamed at me. I was stuck looking into that inky hole, the edges dribbling down the fresh drywall as it oozed and ran. Suddenly I was sure that part of that darkness was ahead with the eyes that were looking out at me from whatever inky void it inhabited, maybe with hands that wanted to pull me into that dark hole it inhabited. As if it had read my mind, I saw dark hands grip the edges of the spot, trying to pull itself out and enter my world. It never lost eye contact as it pulled itself out, and I could see the vague outline of its head as it came free of the spot with that placental pop. It was all I needed to see. Suddenly my legs were moving in overtime, my heart was racing like a steam engine, and I was out the door and slamming it behind me before I could quite remember how I had gotten onto the porch. Even through the blood pounding in my ears and the rubber of my sneakers pounding on the wooden floor, something else dominated my hearing, and there was one sound that I would never forget. I may not be able to remember how I came to be on the porch, heaving and gasping for air, but I do remember the sound I heard just before I threw the door open and I was free. It was a plop,
and a splatter, similar to a bucket of paint being emptied on the ground. I ran home, calling Jack as I took off up the sidewalk. He picked up on the second ring. "I'm not coming back for you. I told you that I was... Jack, you got to get somebody back to the site. Someone's there." "Who?" Jack asked, and I could hear his skepticism. "If this is some kind of goof, I don't get it." I told him how I'd gone back for my watch and I'd seen someone skulking about the site. I didn't tell him about the oozing hole in the wall. He'd see that. However, I did tell him that I had thought the guy might be on drugs, so he should probably be careful. He was banging his fists on the drywall, so I booked it, I finished, trying to keep it believable. The crew was just starting to warm up to me, and I didn't want them to think I was a nut job. Jesus Christ, I thought you ex-cons were tough. I'll go have a look. You just stay home. I'll let you know what I find. That was hours ago. Since I got home, I've been in my room, waiting on Jack to call, and I decided to write this while I waited. When I opened my laptop, though, my desire to get this down became all the more prevalent. As I slid it open, I caught a glimpse behind me and realized that I'll be fortunate if I have time to finish this tale. I could see a basketball-sized hole reflected in the screen of my laptop. I got up and locked the door and moved my writing to the living room. I don't know if the locked door will stop whatever may come from that dribbling hole, but I know that it may give me enough time to finish this before it breaks the surface. Keep your eyes peeled for water spots. You never know what might come slipping out. Man, the rain's really coming down out here. I have to check my phone for flood advisories. I always prefer my rain on the gentle side and never on the coming in the house side of things. Neighbors are sometimes a headache, especially when they're like the one in the next story we have, since no one I trust would want to be his m'lady.
I was not at fault here. I don't understand why the universe has decided that I should suffer. As I lay here and listen to his throaty, phlegm-filled breathing, I consider again the idea that ending it might be best. It wasn't my fault. I didn't cause what happened to him. He should have just left me alone. Now I'm the one who must suffer his company, maybe for the rest of my life. The day had started with a hard slap of rocks against my window, and I loosed a loud sigh as I thrust the covers away from me. Every morning. Every goddamn morning. I hadn't had to buy an alarm clock since I moved in, so I suppose that was something. As another handful of stones cascaded against the window, I swung angrily out of bed and shifted the curtains open. I did not open the window right away. You only made that mistake once. The pudgy man-child on the sidewalk had just reared back to throw another handful when he saw the window open and smiled happily. That smile showed me every inch of his yellow teeth, his spotted gums, and the spit that covered his half-rotten teeth in a sheen of translucence. He was dressed in his usual attire, and I imagined I could smell him from 2 floors up. He wore ratty Chuck Taylor sneakers, cargo shorts in February that likely hadn't been washed since his mother had bought them from JCPenney, a ratty black trench coat that covered his grease-stained t-shirt depicting a busty anime girl who seemed overjoyed to be stretched across his voluptuous C-cup breasts, and a wispy beard that made his face look dirtier somehow, and the battered black fedora that capped it all off. This is what he had worn, or some iteration of it, every day since we had first met 2 years ago, and I shook my head as he waved a pudgy hand at me. "Good morning, m'lady." He knew my name. I'd told it to him 1,000 times, but he always insisted on calling me m'lady.
Kenneth, what the hell do you want?
I was grumpy about being woken up, and sour about Kenneth being the first person I saw 9 mornings out of 10. "Well, I just thought that since we work today, I'd offer to walk you. We're on the same shift again, so just seems like you might appreciate the company." I sighed. I would have appreciated the company. Any company but Kenneth's.
I'm gonna be a minute, Kenneth. A long minute, so feel free to just go on without me.
I can wait for you. I'll be right here when you get done. When you're ready. Unless you'd rather I wait inside. He snorted through a partially clogged nose. I saw the gleam that came into his piggy eyes and shuddered.
I'd rather you went on without me, Kenneth, but since there's nothing I can do to stop you from waiting, I suppose you can just wait on the front porch.
I closed the window then, blocking him out and pulling the curtains closed as I went to get ready for work. Every day, every goddamn day. I've been living in this townhouse for the last 2 years, and I should have known that the rent was too good to be true. The lady who showed me the house was very complimentary about the neighborhood. She talked about the convenient garbage pickup, the cost-effective water measures she had installed, the proximity to restaurants in downtown, and all at a cost that was nearly half of the other rentals in the area. I had been attending college at the time, the college being about 3 blocks from my apartment, and it had sounded like a real sweetheart deal. I was moving my stuff the first time I met Kenneth. I say met, but I smelled him before I saw him. Have you ever been next to someone on the subway who maybe doesn't shower regularly? The kind of person who covers it up with body sprays instead of just washing their clothes and wearing deodorant. The kind of person you don't really want to stand too close to because their clothes look like they might get grease on yours if they brush up against you. That was what I was assaulted by as this mountain of a man came wandering over to introduce himself. He was dressed in cargo shorts and a t-shirt that day, the July heat too much for even his trench coat to handle, with a pair of sandals that put his yellow toenails on display. I was carrying a box of books inside when I heard him greet me by name. That should have been my first indication that something was afoot.
Hey, welcome to the neighborhood. I'm Kenneth. My mom said I had a new tenant, but she failed to mention how beautiful she was. Would you like some help?
I had thanked him, but Kenneth's idea of helping seemed to entail watching me move boxes while he talked my ear off about video games, anime, and fantasy roleplay. He was aghast that a girl as worldly as me, whatever that was supposed to mean, had never seen an anime. I admitted that I had watched some Sailor Moon when I was in elementary school, mostly because it was on when I got home. He scoffed at that, though, and waved a pudgy hand at the mention of what he called girly anime. The fact that I didn't play D&D or video games was also a subject he wished to remedy. Thankfully, I had moved all my stuff in by the time he started talking about the 3rd or 4th game franchise, of which he was a super fan, and I thanked him for his help.
I'm going inside to unpack now, so I'll see you.
Ooh, I can help you unpack if you like.
I'd been standing in the doorway when he said it, the front door the only thing that lay between him and I. The look that crossed his face when he offered to help me unpack was akin to a cat left to guard a mouse. I could just picture his grubby man-child fingers pawing through my clothes, finding some reason to stumble across my underwear, pressing my shirts to his pug nose, and had to stifle a full-body shudder.
On second thought, I'm pretty tired, Kenneth. I think I'm going to rest and unpack tomorrow. Have a good night.
He started to protest, but I closed the door on him and locked the deadbolt. The door had 3 locks, a twist lock, the deadbolt, and the top chain. I engaged all of them before turning around to make something to eat. I had already decided that I would unpack before going to bed today, leaving Kenneth with no excuse to go upstairs and touch any of my things. His annoyance had become creepy pretty quick, and I did not want him hanging around any more than I could help. I had just gotten to the entryway to the small kitchen when I heard an unsettling noise from the front door. I turned and found the doorknob twisting a little as whoever was on the other side tried to quietly open my door. I thought about seeing who it was, but my fear had a firm grip on me. Home is where you're supposed to feel safest, and that turning knob negated any safeness I might have felt. I couldn't prove it was Kenneth, but I couldn't prove it wasn't. The turning stopped after a few seconds, and I made a mental note to get a chain for the back door, too. The first 6 months were probably the least eventful. I enjoyed my newfound freedom of having my own space, but I definitely noticed some of the strangeness in the house. I would come home to find things moved or find things missing, and I suspected that Kenneth had been in while I was gone. More than once I would catch a whiff of Axe body spray upstairs, a smudge on something that looked like a fingerprint, or just something moved that shouldn't have been. Kenneth came over to hang out a lot, and I quickly got tired of having him around. He was always overly friendly, almost fawningly so, and I began to suspect that he had a crush on me. He brought over anime or his Xbox, and I have spent many evenings reading subtitles or watching him finish some level on a game. He was annoying, but I felt that he was ultimately pretty harmless, and the movies he brought over were sometimes pretty cool. He seemed harmless, if not a little clingy. Anytime I would start to feel the least bit comfortable around him, though, I remembered that look on the doorstep and began to rethink. I gave his mother a key the first time I changed the locks, telling her I suspected an old tenant was using the key to come and go as they pleased. After I found the chain off the back door, something I was zealous about keeping chained at all times, I didn't bother giving her a key. After that, the intrusions stopped. Then, COVID had happened. The city did the lockdown thing, and suddenly all the classes were online, all the functions were canceled, and I was spending more time than usual inside my apartment. During this time, unfortunately, my grades began to suffer. Some people can absolutely take classes online and do fine, but I'm not one of those people. I was one of those popular girls in high school who liked to bask in a place's environment and social structure. Suddenly, having professors that I couldn't talk to face-to-face was hurting my grades. Suddenly, not having peers to talk to review notes with, and to bounce ideas off of was hurting me. And as my grades suffered, the school threatened to take away my grant. The grant was how I paid for housing, so I doubled down and tried to bring them up again. I studied long hours, watched tutorials on YouTube, and read anything that I could find on the subject matter, but nothing seemed to help. Kenneth also did not help with this particular problem. Despite the order to wear masks and social distance, Kenneth was always trying to come over and hang out like he used to. He wasn't in school, all his friends were already online, and neither he or his mother thought this was more than the flu. I don't know how many times I would look through the peephole and find him maskless on my front porch with an anime box set of something or his Xbox waiting for me to hang out. I tried to be nice to him, but as my grades suffered, so did my mental health, and I started ignoring him after a while. Then, after a horrible semester, my grant was cut, and I was left waiting to re-up next year. That's how we'd come to our current predicament, me working and Kenneth being paid to hang out with me. I came out the front door 45 minutes later to find him sitting on my porch swing, his phone in his hand, and his rocking making the chains grind together annoyingly.
Is that really what you're wearing to work?
It's not like they care. It's Walmart. As long as you show up, they don't care what you have on.
He had a point, but I still tried to tune him out as we walked to work together. I had started working at Walmart after my savings started to dwindle. My landlord, Kenneth's mother, cut my rent a little.
Because of all this pandemic nonsense, she said, with a little scoff.
However, it still only floated me another month or so before I needed to get a job. Walmart was hiring, and they needed warm bodies. Kenneth didn't work there right away, but after hearing that I had started working there, he was soon applying for a job as well. Charles, one of my assistant managers, was a gaming buddy of his, and I assumed the source of my constant stock shifts with Kenneth. It was a real toss-up, which one of them I hated more these days. Kenneth was unnaturally quiet on the way to work today. His face had that look that let me know he was thinking about something very hard, and I feared that he would ask me out again. He had asked me out about once a month since I moved in, and I had just started ignoring him, despite his mother's pressure. I got the feeling that she was getting worried about him not leaving the nest, and she hoped that a nice girlfriend would be enough of a mother stand-in to help him get out of her basement and into mine. Sorry, Mama Kenneth, but that dog wasn't hunting in these woods. She could find some other girl to pawn her precious angel off onto.
So, m'lady, he said, finally finding his courage, you may have noticed that, Valentine's Day is tomorrow.
I rolled my eyes at him theatrically.
It had somehow escaped me after unloading a metric ton of Valentine's Day candy and toys over the past month, Kenneth. But thanks for bringing it to my attention.
Well, I was just wondering if you'd like to be my Valentine this year and go on a date with me tomorrow.
I sighed. Every year with this guy.
No, Kenneth. For the 1000th time, no.
Kenneth's face got that look about it that small children get when you tell them no.
But why? Don't tell me you already have a date.
Nope, sure don't. I intend to stay in on Valentine's Day since I have the night off.
Well, that's fine. We don't have to go out or anything. We can stay in and rent a movie and Maybe cuddle on the couch and...
I rounded on him then, my frustration and lack of patience getting the better of me, as I erupted liquid hate all over this yipping puppy of a man.
No, Kenneth, I have told you no 1,000 times, and the answer will always be no. I don't want to date you. I hardly want to be your friend most days. And the thought of you sitting next to me on the couch gives me hives. Move on!
Kenneth just stood there, his face transitioning between barely contained tears and barely contained rage. His mouth seemed like it wanted to say something, but his brain seemed to be holding it at bay. He looked like he was trying to chew himself from the inside out, and the tears seemed to win out in the end. His eyes began to flood with impotent water, the flood falling to his t-shirt as he turned and ran back towards home. He looked like one of those anime characters he loved so much as he fled from his spurning, and I guessed later that might have been his intention. I let him go, making sure he rounded the corner before turning to head to work. Some of us still had bills to pay. I thought that maybe Kenneth would have learned a little something after my outburst, but he clearly hadn't. I got home very late that night to find him sitting on my porch with a heart-shaped box of chocolates. "My lady," he wheezed, rising ponderously from the seat, "you've returned to home at long last." The look on my face should have told him everything he needed to know about how glad I was to see him. I brushed snow off the shoulder of my jacket and wondered how long he'd been sitting there waiting for me. It had been chilly when I'd gotten to work, but not really uncomfortably so. That had changed quickly over the last 8 hours, and all anyone at work could talk about was the freezing blizzard that was rolling in tonight. The old-timers were saying that the Weather Channel called for 3 feet of snow overnight, and it had already started to powder as I'd left at 10. I had walked back home with only the streetlights to keep me company, a welcome change from the usual yarking in my ear of Kenneth. Now, it seemed, I would have to get loud with him all over again.
Yeah, you know why I had to stay so late? It was you. You didn't show up for work, so I had to do your job and my job tonight. I had to stock 2 departments in 8 hours, and then, when I couldn't get it done, I had to stay an extra 4 hours and finish your work.
He backed away, holding up the box of chocolates like it was a shield, clearly not receiving the greeting he had hoped for. "Yeah, I kind of had a little freak out when you said you wouldn't be my girlfriend, but I realized that once you had the chance to calm down, you'd come to your senses. And we could plan our date for tomorrow. Here, I got you these chocolates. It's kind of late to make a reservation for anywhere, but, He stopped talking when I slapped the box out of his hand, the half-eaten box scattering across my porch.
No, Kenneth, I will not date you. I will not walk with you to work. I'm through pretending to be your friend. Go away and leave me alone. Take a hint, you insufferable man-child. I don't like you, and I don't want to hang out with you.
I walked to the door and keyed it open, blocking it so he couldn't just follow me in. When I turned back to look at him, though, I was a little worried about doing this on the porch. Kenneth was breathing heavily, and I thought for a moment that he might be crying. The breathing was filled with rage, though, and I was suddenly very aware that I was a 5'2" woman yelling at a man who was nearly 6 feet tall and weighed about twice my weight. I suddenly needed to get in the house in a very short amount of time. I needed the door between Kenneth and I. I needed to call his mother, if not the police, and explain to her that her son was on the verge of a restraining order. "What the hell is your problem?" Kenneth bellowed, and I half closed the door as he turned to let his spittle of rage fly at me. "I'm nice to you. I try to be your friend. I bring you gifts. I do everything that a boyfriend does, and you still won't date me. That's not fair. You're supposed to love me. You're supposed to fall in love with me because I do all the things that girls like. I even went and bought the box set of Sailor Moon so we could just sit and watch it together, since I know you like that girly crap." He took a step towards me, and I slammed the door in his face. I had just engaged the deadbolt when he twisted the knob and slammed his full weight against the door, bellowing like a wounded animal.
Go home, Kenneth. Don't bother me anymore, or I will call the police.
He banged on the door a while longer, but I ignored him. When I had finished making myself a bowl of chili, I found that he had stopped pounding on the door. I ate my food, showered, got my clothes ready for tomorrow. On the off chance that we didn't get 3 feet of snow, I would need to go to work tomorrow and deal with Kenneth. He would likely be waiting for me as always, smiling his butter-toothed grin and waiting like an excited puppy for me to come out and play. I was snug in my bed, preparing to sleep, when I heard the music. The music was soft, romantic, and I thought for a moment that it might be something by John Legend. I could hear it coming from right below my window, and I flipped the covers back angrily as I went to have a look. Sure enough, it was Kenneth. He was parked in the snow, a large silver boombox in his hand, and as he lifted it up, bad 80s movie style, I opened the window. We made eye contact, his eyes filled with earnest emotion, and mine filled with nothing but puppy-kicking rage. I opened the window, chill scraping across me.
Go home, Kenneth.
No,
Kenneth said.
not until you agree to date me.
You're going to freeze out there.
Then let me in and keep me warm.
He said, unable to keep that grin off his face. I just closed the window on him. He'd get cold and go home eventually. The music stopped about an hour later, and I guessed that his batteries had run dry after all that continuous playing. The next morning, I woke up to a sea of white. The snow hadn't been 3 feet deep. The snow had been 5 feet deep, and it spilled over onto my porch when I opened my door that morning. The wind was made of frozen razor blades, the power holding but flickering a little now and then, and I called work to see if I had to be there today. They said that they would be closed for the next few days. They told me to stay safe, and I decided to settle in for a well-deserved couple of days off. I had expected Kenneth to bother me since I was now trapped in my house, but he never came around. I got to enjoy a nice breakfast, and even got to watch some TV before I was reminded that Kenneth existed at all. The knock came as the laugh track played on my 3rd episode of Friends, and I sighed as I tied my bathrobe so as not to give him any ideas. He would want to come in, pretending like we'd never had a fight yesterday at all, and I would likely have to yell at him again. I was surprised to see that it was Kenneth's mom, Janet, and not her portly man-child when I opened the door. "Hey there," she said, shivering on my porch as she pulled the scarf around her mouth. "I was just wondering if Kenneth was over here." Janet is, quite frankly, the sweetest woman I've ever met. In the 2 years I've been here, she's tirelessly fixed anything that's wrong in the townhouse, brought over food for things like 4th of July or Thanksgiving, and even apologized for Kenneth on more than one occasion. She's like Cartman's mom from South Park. She was a lovely woman, and while aware that her son was a nightmare, there was only so much she could do besides love him.
Not since last night, ma'am.
"Oh dear. Well, I do hope he's okay. He said you two had a little fight yesterday, and he was coming over to try to make up." I gritted my teeth hard enough to hear them creak, but I held in the rage I was feeling so I didn't cook this nice, oblivious lady alive. "Well, if you see him, tell him I was worried, okay?" As she left, I saw that someone had shoveled the sidewalk, and she had made a little path to my door. That was nice of them, but it seemed I really didn't have anywhere to go. The city was buried under snow and basically shut down. It appeared I could be inside for a while, and I decided to settle in and enjoy my time off. The weirdness didn't start till almost sundown. I was making dinner when I noticed a smell hanging around the apartment. I looked around, wondering if I'd forgotten to take the trash out or something. It was a wet smell, with an underlying odor of cologne. It was like someone had tried to cover a mess with deodorizer, and the longer I stood cooking at the stove, the more my head began to ache. The longer I stayed in the miasma, the worse the smell got, and the stir-fry I was making started to swim a little as I cooked it. I ended up eating it a little underdone as I fled the kitchen to the living room. As the swinging door opened, I stopped and basted in the swampy tang of smells from the living room and the kitchen. In the kitchen, it had smelled like funk. In the living room, it smelled like the inverse. Someone had been in my house. Of that I had no doubt. The smell of spray cologne was strong in here, like a pungent wall that surrounded the couch. And as I sat, I could feel something flaking beneath me. It was like sitting in a seat behind a small child, and as I looked, I could see chip crumbs sticking to my pajama pants. They were orange and smelled strongly of Doritos. I set my bowl down as I stood and walked through the house. I could see smudges around the room, especially on my figurines and some of my pictures. Someone with large, greasy fingers had been touching my things, and when I moved past the end of the table near the door, I took up the keychain with the mace on it. The doors were deadbolted,
and though I didn't know how Kenneth had gotten in my house, I was certain that he was the source of this. If he thought he could hang out in my house and violate my privacy just to get his rocks off, he had another thing coming. My food was cold by the time I got done, triple-checking every room in my apartment just to be sure. There was nowhere he could have stayed hidden from me, not someone his size, and after spraying some Febreze around, I took my food up to my room and just ate it cold. I felt uncomfortable in the open down there, and as the snow blew and the wind howled, I sat on my bed and listened. At some point, I fell asleep, curling up in my bed as I listened to the silent house around me. When I came to, the lights were off in my room, and the curtains were thrown open to reveal a crystalline moon peeking in. The room was as quiet as the house, but I was aware of a heavy, wet sound as I came awake. It sounded like a dog, one that's been left out in the heat, and I scanned around to find the source of that heavy breathing. My eyes cast around, looking for the noise, and finally settled on a large black spot in the corner of the room. The darkness there was deep, the pitted murk blighted by a pair of small ovals that seemed to reflect the moon. The breathing was coming from there, and as it got heavier, the darkness seemed to shift unnervingly, like someone lurking in the gloom, trying not to be noticed. "M'lady," someone almost whispered, and I was up and across the room in a matter of seconds. I snapped the lights on, hands reaching for anything I could find to defend myself with. I expected to see him much too close as the lights came on. I expected him to bury me under his weight, pushing me down and feeling his hands as he tried to kiss me, to touch me. I gripped the ceramic vase as the lights came on, preparing to swing it and shatter it against his head as he... There was nothing. The lights came on and revealed nothing but an empty room with an anxious girl looking crazily around for an attacker who wasn't there. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat up and argued with myself until the sun came up. I knew what I had seen. I had seen Kenneth in the corner, heard the same deep, watery breathing I had heard 1,000 times. But I couldn't have seen him. Kenneth was a large and stocky fellow. There was no way he could have gotten away in the split second between the lights being off and the lights being on. This wasn't someone who could squeeze under my bed in a split second or slip into my closet without notice. Kenneth often got winded on walks to work, and the idea that he could quickly get out of my sight was laughable at best. Still, he had been there. That whole next day, I saw signs of someone having been in my house. It started as I finally got up for the day. As I came downstairs, I smelled something getting ready to burn in the kitchen. I pulled my robe around myself and quickly pushed into the cloud of smoke that awaited me. On the stove, smoke billowing up, was one of my good pans. I turned the stove off, jerking my hand away as I grabbed the handle of the pan. It was broiling. The burner turned all the way up, and I grabbed an oven mitt and took the pan off the stove. It wasn't until I put it in the sink that I saw a single blackened pancake at the bottom. A heart-shaped pancake. I was scraping the grit from the bottom of the pan when I suddenly heard an all-too-familiar theme song from the living room. The TV had been off when I got up. The lights dimmed to a soft glow. From under the swinging door, I could hear the TV blaring, and the pulse of bright lights clicked up to the max. I pushed in, expecting to find Kenneth parked on my couch, waiting for me with his big serial killer grin and his excuse of how, "Oh, well, the door was open, so he'd come right on in." But there was no one in the living room when I came through the door. There was, however, an indent in my couch, roughly the size of a large someone's backside. I searched the apartment again, already knowing what I would find, but needing the reassurance that I would find it. There was no one, just me, in my apartment. I turned off the TV and cleaned up the mess, waiting till 9 before calling my landlord, wanting to hear her tell me that Kenneth had come home. I wanted her to answer the phone and hear Kenneth in the background as he loudly whined for food or money or something. I wanted the confirmation that he was home, but I also feared it, because if he was home, then what the hell was going on around here? She answered on the 4th ring. "Hello? Hello? Did you find him? Please say you found my baby." I sighed, my hopes shattered.
No, ma'am. I was just calling to see if he had turned up.
I could hear her sob before telling me that no one had seen him and how worried she was about him, and to please call if I heard anything. I got dressed and decided to sit on the porch for a while,
the house suddenly feeling too small for me. I thought I heard some rustling as I slid out of my pajamas and into some real clothes, but I did my best to ignore it as I made some tea and stepped out into the frigid air. The smoke from my tea plumed up as I sat on the swing that Kenneth had occupied yesterday, letting the cold air clear my head as I tried to read the book I had brought with me. The longer I sat, my eyes roving over the winter wonderland in my own yard, the harder it became to maintain my anxiety. I was making too much out of this. Surely I had been imagining things, or a power surge caused by the weather had turned my TV on, or I'd been sleepwalking or something. The more I let the cold wash over me, the more I assured myself that I was just being silly. As noon came and went, the cold beginning to abate and the snow starting to soften, I went back inside. My stomach was growling for some lunch, but the icy chill from outside made me long for a shower first. I had all but forgotten about my trepidation and anxiety, and simply wanted to be warm and snuggly as I enjoyed the rest of my afternoon. I would have a shower, put on some nice pajamas, make the stew I had set the ingredients out for in the fridge, and then head to bed after a nice evening spent at rest. As the warm water cascaded over my skin, I felt the cold dissipate and the leftover anxiety melting away. The shower had always been my safe place, my relaxation zone, and standing beneath the warm deluge made me feel a sense of peace that I'd been missing before the communion with nature. I washed my hair, lathering myself up, and just stood under the water as the soap and my worries slid down the drain. At least, I did, before I felt someone touch my hair. I have long blonde hair, the kind that falls to about the small of my back and must be meticulously maintained so it doesn't look trashy. If I'm sitting on the couch watching TV, there's probably a brush in my hand, and my hair is flipped over my shoulder. I've always been sensitive about my hair, and I don't let people touch it very often. So when someone ran their fingers through my long blonde mass of wet hair, my eyes snapped open, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I had felt the slight tug as 2 or 3 thick fingers slid down and parted the wet locks. I slipped as I stumbled forward, catching myself on the wall before I fell and hurt myself. Through the soupy curtain of foam, I looked around for the source of the touch, expecting to see him. I expected to see a bulbous shape leering at me from behind the curtain. But as I swiped the tangled muck out of my eyes, I was greeted with an empty bathroom. I came shakily out of the shower, hands trembling as I reached for my towel. I was shaken badly. I knew what I had felt. Enough men had tried to touch my hair for me to know what it felt like, and I couldn't trick myself into believing I'd just been imagining things. As I slid back into my clothes, the fog still thick around me, I was met with something even less easy to overlook. Written in the steam on the mirror, the lines reflecting my own horrified face back at me, was the word, "M'lady." I ran, half-dressed from the bathroom, and slipped on the surprise waiting for me in the hall. I went down hard on my backside, bruising my tailbone. The floor was covered with something that my wet feet found slippery, and now that I was on eye level with the floor, I could see them. They had been scattered artfully, leading towards my door in a line of red blotches. The rose petals would have been romantic on any other occasion. At the moment, they left me breathless as I leaned against the wall, watching the door creak slowly open. Behind it, the light in my room dimmed. I could see a thick, softly shadowed form, his eyes gleaming as his tongue slid over his thick porcine lips. I vaguely remember tripping down half the stairs, bruising my legs as I ran for the door. I remember grabbing my phone from the end table by the door, the charging cord coming free as I ran for the porch. I remember talking to the operator, my teeth chattering as I shivered on the porch. My hands and feet were numb, my hair getting stiff from the cold, when the lights lit the icy yard. The sun had started to melt the snow, even as it set behind the nearby houses. The lights on the snow looked odd, almost ethereal, and as they approached, I was thankful when someone threw a blanket over me. One of the officers stayed to take my statement, as the others searched the house. As I told him what had happened, I heard the snow crunch as my landlady came over to see what all the fuss was about. The police came from inside a moment later, shaking their heads and telling me they hadn't found anything. Someone was definitely in there, though. There were rose petals all over your bed and a box of chocolates sitting in the center. Someone had planned quite a romantic surprise for you, though I'm guessing the feeling wasn't mutual.
I shook my head and started to tell them about Kenneth's ambush on my porch the night before, but that was when I saw him again. The snow had melted some, and I could see him hunched by the fence line. He was staying still, trying not to be noticed, but I had seen him. His ridiculous black trench coat was a dead giveaway, and I screamed as I pointed at him. His mother looked over my shoulder, pushing me aside as she ran towards her son. I grabbed the rail as I watched her go, the cops chasing after her, wondering why he hadn't moved. The jig was up. We could see him. Why was he just sitting there? When his mother started screaming and the police officer started calling for an ambulance, I knew something was wrong. That was 2 days ago. He was dead, of course. He had frozen to death, waiting for me to invite him inside. They found the boombox sitting around his feet, frozen to the ground. His coat had been frozen to the back of the fence, and he had simply gone to sleep and never woken up. His mother, of course, was quick to blame me. Why hadn't I let him inside? Why hadn't I called her? And on until the police had finally taken her away. I had taken a few things and gone to stay at a hotel for the night. I just couldn't stay in that house, knowing that there was a dead body in my yard. I thought, at the time, that would be the end of it. They would take his body, and the weirdness would end. Even if his spirit was somehow attached to my apartment, I would just move. His mother wouldn't want me living there anymore anyway, not after I had led to the death of her precious angel. I would just take my things and go elsewhere. When I woke up this morning to find the words "M'lady" written on the bathroom mirror, I knew then that this wasn't attached to my apartment. The haunting had nothing to do with my place at all. He's attached himself to me. Lying here, writing this, I can already hear his raspy, phlegm-filled breath from the corner of the room. It appears that, unlike in life, I may be his M'lady after all, unwilling or not.
Oh, it's a very comfy sort of day. A day like any other, and like no other. I invite you to cherish these days as you cherish these stories. For one day, this might be something you look back on and smile while you listen to your own rainstorm outside. It's never much fun to have to find socks. I don't mean washing them. I mean, finding them once they're washed. Mating them back together, finding just the right pair. It's a real pain, especially if, like me, your dryer gets hungry. So, you can imagine the subject of our next story's frustration when something keeps taking his socks.
I shouldn't have cared so much. They were just socks after all. But it was becoming such a problem. We moved into our house about 3 months ago, our first real house. I honestly thought this was going to be a fresh start for my wife, my daughter, and I. We've been bumping around from place to place since Lisa was born, and we'd lived in a new home every year since she was a year old. It had nothing to do with our landlords or rowdy neighbors or paranormal happenings, as is often the case in these kind of stories. Her mother and I simply kept getting better jobs, which required us to move from one side of town to the other for work. That kind of moving made it hard for Lisa to make any friends or feel comfortable in any place she knew, since she knew she just had to pack up and leave again soon. After 8 years of moving around and never fully unpacking, my wife and I gained some level of job stability. I was a junior VP with the company I worked at, and my wife had become a manager at the store where she worked. This meant the money was steady, the job was consistent. We decided it was time for something a little more permanent. We started house hunting right away, and after a few weeks, we stumbled across what we thought was our dream home. It was less than 30 minutes from both my office and her store, a bus ride away from school for our daughter, positioned out of town so as not to deal with the constant noise of the big city, and a big backyard with plenty of room for our growing family. As I look back on it now, I never would have expected what came next. We'd been in the house for less than a week when I first started noticing the socks were missing. "Honey, have you seen my black dress socks?" I was standing in the laundry room, looking into the dryer like I expected my missing sock to just appear out of thin air.
My wife walked onto our back porch to see what I was talking about. Her bathrobe replaced with a work uniform. I should have left for work 10 minutes ago. I would miss my carpool at this rate. But there I stood with one sock on and one bare foot. I had searched under, around, and on top of the dryer for the missing sock, and had finally started looking into the empty dryer like an utter fool. My wife said she hadn't seen it, but wondered if I'd seen the fluffy pink socks she liked to wear to work. "I'm missing the left one," she said good-naturedly, but I could tell she wasn't pleased about it. We both shrugged it off at the time. We had just moved in, and there were still boxes to unpack. We figured our socks had just gotten lost in the shuffle. As the first month went on, however, and the boxes slowly became less and less, we found it off-putting that we hadn't seen any of our missing socks. Quite the contrary. I was now missing 12 socks out of 15 pairs that I owned. This wasn't such a huge deal for me. I owned 15 pairs of business dress socks that went with my suits, and I could easily match them together. My wife, on the other hand, was fuming because she was missing some of the cute socks she liked to wear to work. Not just our socks. Lisa's socks were missing too. Not to mention that Lisa hadn't been sleeping well since we moved into the new house. Since the first night, she'd been woken up in the wee hours of the morning by a strange noise outside our window. She never saw what made the noise. It never poked a grisly maw up over the windowsill to scare her, but she said it sounded like fingernails scratching along the side of the house. I went and looked, too, and there were definitely scratch marks on the bricks outside her window. They were going up towards the kitchen, and maybe towards the laundry room. I put it off at the time, and made a note to trim the tree branches the next time I was doing yard work. We had quite a few large oaks in the backyard, and their branches did hang pretty low to the ground. Other than the socks and the noise, Lisa loved her new house. She had friends over to play in the big backyard, and had a huge room for all her toys and games, a bathroom all to herself. She would always follow every puffy-eyed morning up with, "But I still love the house, Dad. Please don't make us move," no matter how many times I assured her that this was our house now, and we weren't going anywhere. Sitting in the bedroom now with all of them clustered around me, I don't know if I still feel that way or not. About a month ago, the activity started to escalate. It was the holiday rush for the company I worked for. October, November, and December are big advertising months. I was working late, later than usual these days, to meet my deadline. I had been dozing at my desk, and I jumped one evening as the phone rang, not even realize what time it was. I looked at the clock and gasped when I realized it was almost 8:30. That would be Maggie, I thought, calling to make sure I was okay. Lisa would be in bed already, and Maggie would call to see if she needed to wait up for me or go to bed. Her store was experiencing the same holiday blitz as mine, and she would most likely relish the idea of rolling into unconsciousness until the alarm went off again. I caught the phone on the third ring. "Hello? David, please, I need you to come home now." It was Maggie, but she sounded funny. Not funny ha-ha, but funny scared. She was whispering into the phone, and in the background I could hear someone crying. I guessed that it must be Lisa. The two were likely in the bedroom, the farthest room in the house from anything, with the door locked and the windows drawn. "Maggie, what's going on?" There's something on the back porch," she whispered. "Something big. David, I need you to come home. I think it might be a prowler." "Okay, Maggie, I'm on my way. You two just sit tight, okay?" I had already grabbed my briefcase and my coat and was heading out the door. I made the 23-minute drive in 10 minutes, and I was lucky I didn't see a single police officer. As I pulled into the front yard, I popped the trunk and took out one of the golf clubs I'd had in there since my last golfing trip. It was a big old sturdy driver, and I felt sure that it would be a force to be reckoned with, unless the prowler had a gun, of course. I moved around the side of the house, keeping my back against the wall as I went, and when I got to the back porch, I listened for the sound of something moving around. I'd put a heavy deadbolt on the door leading from the house to the back porch, and I was pretty confident that it was still on. As I listened, I heard something, and I tensed as I cranked my senses up to 11. It was a scuttling sound, like claws on asphalt, but it was also a weird sort of gloopy sound that was barely audible over the scraping and the clawing feet.
I relaxed a bit, thinking it was probably just a raccoon or a possum, and stepped around the corner as I threw open the door and brandished the club. I expected to find an animal, a startled animal that would hiss and run away, but I was unprepared for what awaited me as I threw open the screen door and stepped out on the back porch. Nothing. There was nothing on my back porch, except for the storage boxes we kept out there and the washer and dryer. I looked around, moving the washer and dryer to see if anything had clawed its way behind it, but there was nothing to be found except some scrape marks on the tile. I decided there was a hole somewhere that a critter was getting in through. Upon further investigation, I discovered that the silver tube that hooked the dryer to the outflow was knocked off. I secured it and locked the screen door and went around to the front door to let my wife know that it was just a raccoon or something. She was far from satisfied with this explanation. It sounded way bigger than a raccoon, David. I'm sure I heard something out there. There are noises that Lisa keeps hearing, too. What if it's some pervert who's stealing our socks? Socks? Is that something that people really got off on? I asked. She wasn't amused. I'm serious, David. I want you to do something about this. So I did. I called a contractor and had him come look at the back porch. He couldn't find any way that something could be coming in, but he said he'd pest seal all the exit holes and suggested that I call a pest control company to put out some repellent and keep the critters away. I thought maybe this would stop the problem, but it only seemed to escalate it. Socks began missing at an alarming rate. 3 pairs in one night, 4 pairs in one night. By the end of the month, we'd be through 4 packs of dress socks. Maggie was putting a lot of pressure on me to solve this problem. I was getting angry. My work was beginning to suffer for lack of sleep and lack of focus. 2 days ago, I finally had enough. When I came home to find my sleep-deprived wife dozing on the back porch, all her laundry done during the day now, and having to sit with it to keep it safe, I knew something had to give. I took a week off work, citing stress at home and a need for rest. I staked out the back porch. I had purchased a jumbo-sized packing box, big enough for me to sit in and stake out the back porch to catch whatever was doing this. I was no longer convinced it was a critter, and the fact that everything was reset back the way I had left it in the morning told me it was a devious individual with a lot of experience at this particular pastime. I set up the box and put some snacks, some water bottles, and a gun that I had bought just for the occasion in one corner. I made myself comfortable, as comfortable as you can in a huge box, I guess, and settled in for the night with my phone out and my energy shots close at hand. I must have fallen asleep, because when I woke up, it was to the sound of scrabbly claws again. I peeked out from the box, expecting to see an animal or maybe a weird little man with a sack and a mask like in the manga I had read as a kid. But I did not expect to find what I found out there. My cell phone light shook as the creature came into focus. It was amorphous, like an oozing potato, with 6 long human-like arms coming out of its body. Each arm ended in a hand, and each hand ended in a finger. And each of the 6 fingers each had a little hand that were tipped with long, dirty nails. This was the sound I'd been hearing, the creature scuttling along on its long, dirty nails as it clicked across the back porch. It didn't see me right away. It had its head in the dryer. When it came out, I could see a smooth and bloated head with no neck and a snarl of long, greasy black hair that looked like a wig. It held one of my daughter's socks in a 7th and 8th pair of hands. As it looked at it through watery black eyes, it reached into its body with the other hand and pulled out something. It pulled out what looked like a baby. It looked like an amorphous potato baby that squalled in a soft little gloopy way and waved feebly with its 8 stumpy arms. The creature took the sock and stretched the neck of it out before it placed the squalling thing inside it. The baby stopped glooping at once, making some watery burbles as the creature slid it back into its flesh. And as the creature turned to go, it finally caught sight of me. I saw it scamper towards the back of the dryer, somehow condensing itself to slip in and out again. As it pushed itself into that pipe, it finally saw my flashlight, and I saw the skinned back, 2 large jaws that dominated the front of its face. It looked like a weird Halloween mask, the ones that are a little too uncanny. It opened its mouth, and made a sound like an angry river rushing up to swallow me. I shot it then. I rattled off 3 panicked shots before I could stop myself, and it stopped in its tracks and looked startled. I don't know if I hit it. I don't even know if my bullets could kill it, but I was so scared at that moment that I did the only thing my lizard brain determined was the right course of action. I ran. I flipped out of the box and ran, slamming the door behind me and throwing the bolt as something large and angry thundered against the other side. My wife was there then, pale and unsure, wanting to know what had happened. I turned her around and grabbed Lisa as she came sleepily up the hall. I pulled them all in the direction of the bedroom and locked the door behind us, pushing the chest of drawers in front of it. The police have come and gone now. I called 911 before I started writing this, but they couldn't find anything on the back porch. The officers figured that maybe a bear wandered up or something. They're supposed to be hibernating, but it happens sometimes. Their only real question was how it had gotten out without dropping a single drop of blood after being shot. The back porch is a disaster. It certainly wasn't worried about keeping a low profile this time. The police gave me the number to animal control and told me to call in the morning so they could have a look for the wounded bear. I'm not calling animal control, though. In the morning, we're going to pack up everything dear to us and just get the hell out of here. If that thing can fit through the hole in the laundry room, I have no idea how small it can squeeze. Since the police left, I can hear something outside the windows. I can hear those dirty fingernails as they scrape along the brick walls of the house. Could it squeeze through the crack under the front door? Could it come in through a sewer pipe? My family drifted off into a shallow sleep, but I'm sitting here on the bed, gun by my knee, just listening for the sounds. It stopped scraping its claws about 5 minutes ago. I don't know if that should be comforting or not. I wish I'd just let it keep the socks.
I think that'll just about do it for us today. I'm glad you stopped by today. It's always nice to see you on my couch, listening to more cozy horror while we while the day away. I do hope you'll come back next time, and many times after that, to hear a story from your good old Dr. Plague. To all of you out there, I wish you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.